Good day, everybody. Thank you for coming to portion of the AGM conferences, discussion about amateur radio VHF Rover operations. My name is Russell Beech. I've been roving since the inception of the category in '91, so I've got, depending on what you count, between 30 and 40 roves done. I've been around, so I've learned something, and hopefully I can pass some of that on to you in a useful fashion. So what we have is a statement of what VHF roving is. Very simply, it's moving around from grid to grid inside a VHF contest, exchanging multipliers in that area. The VHF contests I'm talking about are classic number of points times number of multipliers. The 4-digit grid squares are the multipliers, and rovers move in between those during the contest. There's 3 basic categories: limited, which is 4 bands only; classic, which is all bands; and then an unlimited category if you want to deviate from some of the rules and still have fun. 1 or 2 operators. There can be a driver. If the driver doesn't touch the radios, he doesn't count. There can be as many drivers as you want. And yes, that is the rover that I used for a number of my contests. Simple, clean. It did quite well. I'd have trouble using it now because I can't fit all the bands in, but yes, that was what I used for a number of events. Why would I want to rove? I'll touch on some of the top ones. Reason I started, my home station was not competitive. If I wanted to do well, I needed to do something else, and so I put it on the road. You may have found your spouse is retired or otherwise stopped working and you're looking for something to do together. There could be an unspoken corollary. Your spouse may have retired and you're looking for something to do apart. I'll leave that with you. The third one I'm going to mention is that the REC has started a portable operations challenge. If you operate from somewhere that is not your home or a fixed location, they have a scoring system and points and awards for operating, getting out in the field and doing stuff. The rover activities would count for that. When? Well, the big one are the three big ARRL contests: January, June, and September. The most recent one ended the week before the conference. So the next one would be the 3rd or 4th weekend in January in 2022. There's also an ARRL UHF distance challenge, selects your bands and uses distance scoring. That's in August. CQ VHF, 2 bands, 2 meters and 6 meters only. That's in July. And the 10 gigahertz contest, 2 weekends, one in August, one in September. The second weekend is actually taking place this week, the weekend of the annual general conference. I'll add, just for variety, there are also QSO parties, state and provincial. Some of those have mobile and rover categories. A lot of this will apply to those as well. What kind of equipment can you use to start with? Many of us have multi-band HF rigs that also include 50 and 144 megahertz, some of them 432 as well. Those work quite well. 2 of my main rigs are the 706s that have 6.2 and 432 VHF modes in there, and that's what I use on those bands. Once you get above those bands, you're going to start to need to look for transverters and other things like that. They tend not to come as complete rigs. Transverters take a little bit more work. There's some kit building, there's some interfacing. It's an opportunity to learn and grow in your construction abilities if that's what you're looking for. I need to identify that the VHF contests are slightly unique in that they don't have mode limitations. You can use any mode. Weak signal, CW sideband are the most common. There are pockets of FM activity. There's also some digital activity. FT8 is becoming more and more common, particularly on 6 and 2. When you get higher than that, it's less common. Cross mode are also allowed. So if I'm working someone, often I'll hear someone who's fairly strong running sideband. If I come back in Morse, because I have somewhat less power than a big multi-op, they can hear the CW and will often come back to me in when they wouldn't come back to me in sideband. So cross mode is fine. Just log the mode you worked. The log checker doesn't use the mode as part of their error checking criteria. Some unique factors for roving. This is probably where some of this, you're in a vehicle, you're no longer at home. When you're at home operating a contest, the contest is all you need to worry about. When you're roving, there are times when you're on the road, you need to worry about other people. You need to worry about getting home, getting to where you're going. So you need to keep it on the road, you need to keep it on the route, and keep it on time, in that order. Radio comes number 4 when the vehicle is in motion. You have to pay attention to the fact that you are in a public place, in a public doing things, and the public will see you. You can harm them, they can harm you, and you've got to do it properly. You will attack detention. As you can see, that's the Rover setup I use. That's parked in FN13. While I was there, I've had people ask about UFO, storms, wolves, bears, you name it, they've asked about it. At this site, while in all its glory, as you see, I had the local pull up and stopped and, what are you doing? And he asked if I saw some guy in a truck who looked funny and was doing weird things. I didn't really know how to answer, but assumed he wasn't talking about me and just said no. He said thank you and carried on. Weird things are going to happen. Be prepared for it. Be social. Be polite. You may be the only ham they meet, and you don't want to give other hams a bad name if they come up after you. Some of them will be responsible and say, I feel nervous. That looks odd. They will phone the police. It happens. I've had it happen, I'm going to say 3 times in the 30 odd roads I've done. They're going to ask the normal police questions about your vehicle. They may ask about radio. One officer, when he pulled up, he said, oh, you got ham plates. You're not up to no good. But I'm glad you called because you got me out of doing gun inventory that I didn't want to do. That also could happen. Again, be prepared. Ownership, insurance, license. Be polite. Be social. Sometimes, though, it's best to move on. I was parked in a place way out in EN 81 that was a little beach access that they have out there. The neighbor popped his head out and said, you can't be there. We found a dead body there in the summer. I have no idea what connection he was making. There was no way worth the time to argue. It's sometimes just best to say thank you and carry on about your business. Know your limits. This is another facet of the fact that you're driving during a contest. You're doing more than you normally do. You have to know how well you drive. You have to know how tired you can be. You have to know how much energy you can put into driving while you're contesting. You have to know how much contesting you can put into it when you're driving. Don't overextend yourself. Be aware of your vehicle and be aware of road rules. Rovers like to have things tall, but there's a limit to what we can do easily on the road. 13.6 tall and 8'6" wide, as far as I know, are North American standards. If you go beyond that, then you're an out of dimension vehicle and you need special permission. I don't recommend that. It's inconvenient because 8'6" isn't quite big enough to get a 6-foot beam up there full size. I'm working on it, but I haven't got there yet. The one parameter that you will exceed, though there's a provision for it, is being too long. If you extend past the rear of your vehicle by more than some dimension, I've seen listed as both 2 feet and 4 feet, you have to have a warning flag. If you're going to be past the bumper, put the warning flag on. You don't want people to have a reason for saying you're doing something wrong. You want them to see you and say, that's odd, but he's obeying the rules. We want you to come out again, and we want you to have a good time. A word of warning on 12-volt radio equipment. Almost everything we have is 12 volts. That's what's on the label. But actually, a lot of them are happier, a little bit above that. They're actually designed to be used when the vehicle is running. I found that for some of those gear, I'll receive reports that I have FM in my signal, or I have growling in my signal, or distortion, caused by the fact that at 12 volts, the amplifiers, the finals, can't quite keep up with life. So I've got voltage stabilizers, boost regulators that I use for that. I don't think that the TGE device is available from them anymore. I think that they're now partnering with MFJ. I find them a little bit better, not in terms of their performance DC to DC, but they've taken RF into account, and they seem to have a little bit better filtering. The other device there is intended for the car audio market, and you should probably test that for interference in your setup more diligently than the TGE device. You're going to need antennas. That shouldn't be a surprise. I'm sure everybody expected that. It's a little tricky if you want to buy the antennas, because they're kind of not the right size for roving. You sort of want a 5 to 10 long Yagi when you're on the road. Commercial devices tend to be either smaller or bigger, and you may or may not be able to cut them down to size. Having said that, Every single one of my antennas was either designed from scratch or built from a commercial kit. It's not a difficult thing to do. It's part of the learning that I think, well, I find enjoyable, and I hope you guys are willing to do as well if you want to do this. It's not an impossible exercise. There's a lot of information on how to do this available. It's just outside the scope of what I can go into today. The big thing to remember is that it must resist highway speeds, and you need to be prepared for the fact that if you go out in January, it's a saltwater environment, so you will have some corrosion issues that you'll have to attend to from time to time. Along with the antenna, you're going to need some feed line. You've got to get it from the radio to the radiator. You need good feed line. You don't need to obsess about getting the largest feed line and worrying about the lowest loss. Even at 432, let's say a 20-foot length of RG58, there are 3-4 decibels of loss, but that's not a showstopper. It's more important if you have to divert money in your budget around, get quality connectors and install them properly. A bad connector will cause you far more difficulties than a piece of feed line that's a little bit smaller and a little bit higher loss than you would like. Parallel to that, avoid adapters if you can. Put the right connector on the end of the antenna, made it to the radio, made it to the antenna, and avoid the adapters are just another source of noise, another source of failure, another source of things falling apart while you're on the road. Yagi antennas, even the small ones that I've mentioned, will have narrower beams than HF. You will probably need to turn them. It's not impossible. There are stations in the northeast of the US that point straight down the eastern seaboard. They don't rotate their antennas at all. You may, depending on your location, find that the people you're talking to are all in one direction and you don't need to rotate them. Great. If you do need to rotate them, you can turn the vehicle. It does require a bigger, flatter space. Doing it to the side of the road is difficult, but I have done that. You can poke your arm out the window and rotate the antenna by hand. The mini you saw on the first page, that is exactly what I did. Obviously, in the cold and the rain, it doesn't work. If not, you can get a DC rotor. They're available. I haven't used any because I found the UPS, so I have a DC to AC inverter that I use that takes care of that for me. It's just another thing that you have to make sure that you're able to deal with and plan accordingly. Above all, keep it simple. Don't make a mess of it. Use the minimum number of wires and cables, and make sure you understand what they all do. When you're running a contest, any contest, you have to log correctly. This is no exception. Not logging correctly can cause you penalties because you don't have the other people's information correctly. It can cause them penalties because you record things wrong for them. Computers are becoming much more common now, but I don't find them useful in a rover. There's a lot of extra rigmarole with the laptop, and I rove probably for 15 or 18 years without any form of PC in there at all. I use paper. Doesn't crash. Pens are easy to reboot. It doesn't get lost. It's right there. The only reason I have FT8 is I have a laptop is because FT8 has started to become common, and I found that I just can't do FT8 by ear. If you can, by all means, leave a laptop at home and run FT8 by ear would be my recommendation, but I consider that unlikely. I personally then enter the log into Excel and use Excel to convert it to a flat ASCII Cabrillo file. I believe other logging tools will allow you to enter your log later, and if that works for you, fine, do that. If you want to use a laptop, I can advise on the best way to do it. I have a passing reference that an external monitor instead of the laptop itself and a wireless keyboard can help because there's more flexibility with where you mount it. Just because it's important to me, this is the log sheet format I use. Combines a scratch pad on the right with the logging on the left and notes that you can make on the fly because you will get tired and forget things if you don't write them down in front of yourself. Once I've got all the equipment and gear and I've got some idea of what I want to do, now I start to plan what I want to do on the Rove. I find that it's best for me to plan ahead so that I know where I'm going, when I'm going to be there. I've taken into account transit. I've made allowance for stops, and I'm not influenced on the day by being tired and cranky and not knowing, having it rained on me and saying, now I got to make a decision of what I'm doing next. I like to make the plan ahead of time, and it's important to me that I stick to it. By sticking to it, I can advertise it to other persons. I can make setups with schedules. I can figure out multi-ops. I can figure out other rovers. If I'm going to do something, I want to do it in an orderly fashion. If I'm going to do it in an orderly fashion, I feel it's best to tell other people what I'm doing so that they can also make plans around what I'm doing. So location selection involves many things. Are they high up? Are they in the clear? Do I have access to them? It can be beneficial to do a green crew and run out and check on them. If you look at this site, it's on a place called Clark Road on the North Shore of Lake Erie. As you can see, I operated there. It was quite popular for a number of years. But if you were to green crew it now, you'd find that two things have changed of great importance. One, the road is no longer a city road. It's a driveway to the house that's next door. The homeowners are a little bit cranky if you show up. The other thing is that barn is missing. It's because the shore of Lake Erie has migrated north about 50 feet from there. So it's not there anymore. So it'd be a bad idea to plan to operate radio from there. I have found over the years that the most common distance for my contacts on 2 meters is between 1 and 200 kilometers. About the same number between 0 and 100, and then a little bit fewer, but about the same between up to 400 kilometers, with a typical peak in the 550 kilometer range. The reason I state that is to give an idea of the kind of distances we're looking at that you're going to make from a mobile station to decent fixed stations on the road. It will vary depending on the fixed stations closest to you and the other rovers closest to you. There's a huge number of variables, but to give some idea of the kind of radio you can use as a starting point to make your plans, 500 kilometers. Once you've got the plan, publish it. Let people know. Sometimes it makes an immense difference. Sometimes a little bit less. But if you make a plan and you stick to it, people will learn that they can find you. Boeing 4KST online chat page can be used live during the contest to arrange contacts. Obviously, you can't complete them there, but you can set them things up. Number of reflectors. If I can note, Ontario VHF, that reflector, for contest purposes, you need to be in Ontario, but the discussions are literally coast to coast, and we have a number of US members on the same reflector as well. So don't let the Ontario part dissuade you if you're not in Ontario. Recently, K1RZ has put up his interactive map along with W3SZ. I'm not sure how the partnership is formed, but there's an example of that on the right-hand side. This is from the most recent VHF contest. You'll notice two different types of dots. There's black dots, which are fixed stations. So those are people operating from home or club stations or whatever. And there's some lavender purple dots. Those are rovers. So on this map, it updates in real time, and you can track the rovers and see where they're moving to, as well as the fixed stations that may or may not be in range. If you hover over a dot, it'll pull up information, as you can see there. That's that location. It gives distance and bearing from a nominal center point. It also cell number and the number of bands I have. I'm indeterminate about the absolute value of this, but it has been useful to me in the most recent contest. K1RZ in Fox Mary 19 called me up based on this information when I was in Echo Nancy 82, and we made at the end of it a 500 kilometer, 432 megahertz contact, which is not an impossible length, but that's very definitely one of the longer 432 contacts I made on the weekend, only possible because of the use of his tool. Operating an exchange, CQing and answering CQ, at the end of it, you're going to give a 4-digit grid square. You must know that by some means. Many stations will ask for a 6-digit if they want to line up. I take a GPS with me that lists the 6-digit. I also, because I'm planning on fixed sites, I know where I am. If I improvise, I will do my best with the 6-digit, and if absolutely necessary, I will just pick one of the 5 that I have listed there, because unless they're in the next grid, in which case they don't need the 6-digit grid square, it won't make enough distance. I'm going to panic. Contrast with HF, there are far fewer operators on VHF, so skidding is encouraged to get everything lined up. This is amplified by the fact that the antennas are sufficiently narrow and the ranges are a little different, that it can be hard to find people without a little bit of arrangement ahead of time. Texting during the contest, cell phones is also now allowed. That's been just updated in the last few years, as has, you can only make FM contacts on simplex. You have to work direct. You cannot work through the repeater, but there is some permission to call on a repeater and say, is anybody there who can give me a contact? I haven't heard it being done. I have heard of some people who've done it and gotten hostile responses. You'll have to take that, take that into your own hands based on your local repeaters and who you know and don't know on the repeater. Get out, make some noise. Call the most likely active bands 144 50 hertz. That's where you're going to do the lines of the work. Pay attention for E-skip, particularly in June, because things will be much more interesting on 6 meters. Aurora, when it's Aurora seasons, I keep getting told cycle 25 is coming back. 6 and 2 are both quite active on Aurora, and it does go higher than that. General calling frequencies on all bands, 5125, 144, 200. Go up as high as 260 because there is a tradition of microwave ops using that as the coordination frequency for rovers. They've also recently added 14652, the national calling frequency on FM simplex. So if you hear people there, please don't get upset and work them, don't work them, but don't get angry because it is now allowed to actually run contests on that frequency. WSJT standard frequencies, there's no surprise there. The big note for that is please use the North American VHF contest mode. They refine the exchanges somewhat to make it a little bit quicker, and sometimes it gets confused if you send an exchange that's not part of that sequence, and you can get stuck in a loop, which is a bad thing. Be prepared for change. Things are going to happen. You're going to get delays. You have to decide what you're going to do, whether meeting the start of this grid is more important than meeting the end. You may have to scrub a couple of skeds or something, make you ahead of time for what will happen if you have a delay, so that you're not stuck, tired and cranky and wet and hungry and figuring out what do I do now. Have some decision set for you, what worked with your plans ahead of time so that you can deal with it. The other two big things to take away: flashlights are great, but a headlight is better, one that straps to your hat or your forehead so you can have two hands free to work. And bring rain gear, garbage bags. You'll know when you need them. It isn't over necessarily when the contest is over. Traditional ending time is 0300 GMT, 11 o'clock local Eastern time. Please take into account, you still got to get home. Last night as I record this, I had to do a 2 nights ago as I recorded this, I had to do a 2.5-hour transit starting at 11 o'clock. It was a tiring transit. Be prepared for that. When you're at 11 o'clock, you're not on the contest. Unlike a home or a fixed station, you still have to get home, and depending on your route, it could be a long way away. Some years I've stayed in a hotel overnight because it's just too tired to get home that night. Note that there's a slight longer entry window for the contests, VHF contests, in deference to the energy and effort of roving. So there's a 10-day window instead of a 5, but that's just for your information. And as you can see from Murray there, he's trying to work a 1296 FM contest. Sometimes you do things that are a little weird to get things done. Moving up, we're going to 10 gigahertz and to a lesser degree 222. They use distance scoring. Distance is based on some spherical geometry calculations the ARRL has. They use a 6-digit exchange. You're considered to be from the center of each 6-digit square, so you will need to know 6 digits for the microwave stuff. On the plus side, you tend to improvise less, so you can pick your sites and map ahead of time when and where you are, and get a list of 6 digits. If not, GPS and maps will get you there. Again, density goes down as you go up in frequency, so skedding is very extensive. There's a lot of coordination and cooperation ahead of time. And real-time cell and text, let me get that right, I nearly got it very wrong, is very common and often done live. Okay, we've got it set up, let's go with the radio. Because bandwidths are narrow, or densities are narrow, or timing is a little bit more fiddly. So you need to be prepared for that. Site location is even more critical. Must be clear of local stuff as well as distant stuff. VHF can handle some trees and some buildings. Microwaves are stopped dead by things that sometimes you don't even see. So the tops of hills, the downslopes of hills, lakes are great because there's very few trees that grow in the middle of the lake, so it's usually clear. The lake also acts as a heat sink and reservoir. So sometimes there's extra tropo effects that can happen just because you're bordering on a lake. If you can see a long way, it's a good site. If you can see a long way, the radio can see a long way. If you go to the Hey What's That site, you can plug in locations and it'll give you some estimates of what the actual visual range is to the horizon. You can see from a map without going there probabilities of things, and it can be useful as a tool for some experiments, which is what I did here. I used Hey What's That to get some visual paths between the area I generally was in Whiteface Mountain. So this is a not state-of-the-art white box. It still works, but the oscillator is drifty and it's only got about 100 milliwatts. I borrowed a horn because I was helping do some testing at an EMI house nearby. And with that, I communicated 300 kilometers from 3 different spots in the area to Whiteface because I could go to Hey What's That and get some areas that looked like they were good. Because I did that, I also was able to identify where north was and where Whiteface Mountain was relative to the roads I was going to be on. The beam widths here at microwaves are often very narrow down to single degrees. So you need to know where north is and you need to know what the bearings are. There's online sites, there's apps. I've made a tool in Excel because I'm just that kind of guy. The current standard, by the way, when I say this is obsolescent, they've now got absolutely locked GPS locked and GPS disciplined oscillators so that when they say .100, they know they're .100. They also have increased the power. This is 100 milliwatts. They're now measuring their power in watt levels. The older gear that I have, this one has about a 5 kilohertz drift, but other versions of this are up to 20 kilohertz. Reducing variables can help you get things set up and moving quickly. This is a K100 map. It's something I want to illustrate with microwave activity. If I draw your attention to Lake Erie, you'll see eight black dots there. These are all rovers, microwave rovers set up, clusters of them actually. Most of those dots represent 3 stations. Those are different sites that they activated in this 2-hour window. They actually move around more than this over the course of the contest. So weekend 1 in August for the 10 gig, it was a Lake Erie weekend. Weekend 2, it's a Lake Huron and Lake Michigan weekend. Yes, those dots are in a different place. Many of those 6 dots are the same operators that were around Lake Erie the weekend before. Using this tool and some other tools is very beneficial running 10 gigs so you get an idea of where other people are. You need to be in range and you need to have some understanding of where they are relative to you to get things set up. I want to make some mention of different propagation modes that affect 10 gig and up. That probably affect HF and VHF bands, but aren't as noticeable and aren't as important because there's other propagation modes around that dominate. All radio bounces. It bounces usefully at microwave frequencies off of rain and snow, off of airplanes, and off of cities. The point this up is because you can control it or at least take advantage of known instances to some degree. This is a screen capture of the K0SM rain scatter application. Those 2 balloons are stations that cannot work each other on 10 gig. They're too far away. There's far too much of Ontario in the middle of them. But they can both see the tops of the rain clouds that are in there in that angry blob above Sarnia. And at the time that this was captured, there was a very good chance they could work rain scatter between those sites. You can, by tracking radar and the rain scatter program, you can actually take advantage of this during a contest and tell stations, it looks like in an hour, we're going to have a rain spell in a suitable place. Let's try something. Second factor that can be taken account depending on a lot of factors that are beyond the scope of this talk is aircraft scatter. If you're in the right location, particularly if the plane is flying directly towards you or away from you to minimize the Doppler effects, you can bounce off the airplane and make a good contact that way. I'm thinking that the corridor from, say, Detroit to Montreal has a fairly decent amount of airplane traffic flying in a relatively straight line. You can, if you're careful, you can plan to take advantage of that and incorporate the aircraft scatter into your plans. You'd have to, W3SZ has done a very good tutorial on his tool. You'll have to find that on YouTube and explore that more if you want to take advantage of it. Once you get on the air, CQing is done on 144.260, as I mentioned before. And yes, people call CQ on 10.368.100, which is the 10 meter calling frequency. 10 gigahertz calling frequency. The use of 144.260 was more common in the days of wideband FM, the old gunplex or oscillators. In those days, the noise figures were in the double digits and the power was in the milliwatt range. So the 2 meter systems you could carry with you had more range than the 10 gig system. Because now the output powers are up into the watt range and the noise figures are down into single digits, mobile to mobile 2 meter systems are now less effective than the 10 gigahertz systems. So contact arrangement by cell and text is almost mandatory. Not quite, but almost. It's actually very, very common for rovers to cluster. They get together. As you can see, this is Hugh and Peter together, ELE and TO. They're on the north shore of Lake Erie here, and it illustrates the cluster. It illustrates the kind of equipment you need, and that you need some geography to set up dishes. They're by the lake shore, and it's a nice sunny day. Okay, what's the third interesting part, or the next interesting part, is they're just celebrating the completion of a 500-kilometer rain scatter QSO way down in New England. So there's a lot going on in that picture, which is of interest, and I could talk for another hour on things like that. Clustering with other rovers is a useful tool, and I recommend actually when you're first going out to make connections and see if you can join up with somebody who's been out there, because you will learn a lot more than I can possibly fit into this talk just by participating in a session like that. There's also a beaconing effect that the strongest stations in between two clusters of rovers will tend to be able to set up. And then once that first pair of stations has set themselves up, then the next set of stations will have bearings, frequencies, and you can overcome a lot of things and work down to the weakest station that way. Enjoy the pace. The 10 gigahertz pace is a little bit less intense. These are two of our Quebec colleagues who are out somewhere remote north of actually, I'm not exactly sure. They're in the woods. They're on the side of a hill. They've got time a little bit to take and, you know, enjoy the trees and enjoy the turning of the colors. This looks like a September event. You'll have a chance to talk radio. You'll be able to see the equipment they have. You'll be able to learn things just by being there. Always look, listen, and learn. Everybody's going to learn something from the other people that are there. Be prepared to enjoy the slower pace. You're not going to work 3 a minute, but you will enjoy the lower rate that you have. You'll have bursts of 3 a minute, but then there'll be gaps while people are moving. You're waiting for rain to come in. Who knows what? Enjoy the lower pace. Find a group of people who also like radio and start learning from each other. Yeah, and pack a lunch. You'll be there a while. And then that's about the end of my rushed presentation. If there are any questions, then by all means, I will do my best to add to our interest. Thank you.